Wonderful. And what I'll do is I'll get started. I'm going to first of all introduce everyone to Scott, part of Wonderland Drinks, who is the official importer of Lindores into Australia, doing a grand job of it as well. Sort of a brand that just sort of appeared from my point of view. I didn't know the whiskey was ready really, and then it was here, and Scott's been dashing about the country letting everybody taste it, and we tasted some and we thought, wow, it's amazing. So let's get someone on from the Lindores Distillery. Scott's just been over there, and yeah, he's got a few stories to tell himself, I'm sure. And then we've got Elliot from the distillery, who's going to tell us a little bit about Lindores in the past, I guess, their history, as well as the new. It's all about new. It's all about what they're creating now, and it's exciting stuff. We've got two or three bottles here that we really don't see in Australia. You should have the ability tonight to purchase them. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more. There will be a discount code for tonight for all Lindores, but I'm going to pass you over to Scott to start with, just to say hi, and then I'll be on the chat, get some questions in there if you've got any questions for Elliot or Scott or myself, and I'll see you all soon. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Craig, and welcome everybody, and of course thanks to Elliot for getting rolling out of bed and jumping in front of us. The time difference has sort of blown out again between the UK and Australia. Now we've got daylight savings kicking in, but yeah, look, I won't talk too much about it, but when the Lindores, we started talking to them quite early on before they were releasing whiskey, and it was just it was a brand and a story that really resonated with us in terms of where does Scotch whiskey come from, where what's the background, what's the what's the history of Scotch whiskey. I mean, we know what the basic history line is about when did distilling start and what have you, but there was this whole incredible bit of history about making it and selling it that it sort of slipped under the radar. And when that was, when I learned about that, and then also saw that their new make had won the World Whisky Awards Best New Make before their product was released. And also that Jim Swan was involved in the distillery's design and the sort of program that they might work with, and also that all of this was sort of kick-started by Michael Jackson, not the dancer, but the singer, but the famous whiskey writer. And I just thought, this is a brand and a story that I think will resonate, not just now, but in years to come. And it was really exciting to be able to get the opportunity to work with them here in Australia. And then of course the first release came, and just the way Lindores went about releasing their first core single malt, I just thought spoke volumes of the distillery, and also how they're going about things. Because quite often you'll find with first releases, they end up going for ridiculous amounts of money. They end up on secondary markets. They're in auction houses. No one can get one. But the way Lindores went about it was saying, well, here's the first release, but it's actually the same as what the everyday core product's going to be, bar a slight variation in the label, and but the price is the same. And that to me, I just thought, wow, that's amazing. That means it's an accessible whiskey, and they're an accessible brand and an accessible distillery, and we've just found that launching the product into the market and the reaction that we're getting from consumers everywhere is exactly that. It's a really accessible whiskey. excuse me, and it's a single malt that just seems to be resonating more and more around the place. And that's not just us saying that. That's quite a number of very reputable whiskey bars getting right behind the product because they've got consumers telling them that what they think about it. So anyway, that's how we sort of came to be with Lindores and what our thoughts have been on it. It's still very early days, but we just think that, from what we've seen and, the new make and the wood that's being worked with has just got this, got an incredible future ahead of it. But yes, I'll hand over to Elliot now, who I was fortunate enough to go and meet in person about a month ago now. I think it would be Elliot. Gosh, seems like a year ago almost, but
it really does.
Yeah,
it really does.
But recently I was fortunate enough to be in Scotland and went and visited Elliot and the distillery. If you get over to Scotland, I highly recommend going for a visit. Just a beautiful, beautiful place and a beautiful setup. Just one of the most beautiful new distilleries that I've had the pleasure of visiting. So anyway, Elliot, over to you.
Thanks so much, Scott and Craig, for organising it and hosting tonight. Obviously, I'm just the guy that's going to tell you a few stories, but it's wonderful to virtually meet you all. Hopefully, we'll all meet in person one day, as Scott's quite rightly pointed out. He was with me about a month ago. It was a great little visit. The sun was still beaming. It's not beaming quite so much anymore, but the temperature's still there. So the way I like to structure my tastings, so to speak, is they're quite informal. I'm not going to say keep your noise down for the next hour and let me just talk. If anyone's got a question, please speak up and we can have an open chat about it. Sometimes you get a better conversation and you get more about the brand info if you just ask the questions as they come along. So the structure I'm going to take, I'm just going to share a few slides with you whilst I talk through some of the more quirkier parts of the history that I like to talk about. Lindores is a very contemporary brand, but it has a history that goes back nearly 850 years now. So it's unrivaled, to be honest. And the fact that we have all this evidence right in front of us is very, very cool. It's exciting and it makes the brand so much more fun to work with. So I'm going to share a few slides, go through a little bit of the history, and then tell you a story about, how Drew, our founder and now director of the business, why he decided to build a distillery here, and how it kind of happened, what was a triggering point. And then from there, we'll move into tasting some products. But Craig's quite kindly pointed out in the chat the order that we're going to go through the products in. So if everybody just checks their chat, that'll be great. Just so you're not pouring the wrong one at the wrong time, etc. So you're actually getting the full hog of our core expressions, which is fantastic. I've not actually done the full range with anybody yet, so you'll be the first. And bearing in mind, one of the products, or maybe even two of the products, haven't even actually launched in Australia yet. So you're probably one of the first people to try it down under. So I'm just going to share my screen just now, and then talk you through the history of Lindores. Okay, let's see, slideshow. There we go. Can everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up to the side. Brilliant, excellent, thank you. Yeah, so just to point out to Craig and Scott, you'll notice it's got the title Lindores Congregation. Just politely ignore that. It's in a preset slide that I couldn't change, but we used this slide setup when we had all of our importing customers and visitors in June, but obviously you came a little bit later on, and then I've just edited it in for Wonderland and the Whisky Company. So our history. So it was the year 1191 that the Benedictine Tyrannisian monks. So Tyrone is a town about 20 miles southwest of Paris. And that's where the Benedictine monks originated from after they were establishing abbeys and priories all through the northern parts of France, southern parts of England and Wales, and then eventually landing in Scotland. The most famous abbey in Scotland now would probably be the Kelso Abbey. And when the Earl of Huntingdon founded the abbey in 1191, he actually commissioned one of the abbot monks who lived and worked at the Kelso Abbey to come across and obviously start running and working in the Lindores Abbey. So how did the abbeys form? Essentially, monks were a very small-knit kind of close group of people. Never more than 20 monks worked in one distillery, they say. And you needed to basically bring a skill set with you. You couldn't be any Tom, Dick or Harry coming to work in the distillery, in the abbey. And so these skills, they came through from whether you're academics, stonemasonries, horticulture, things like that. They all did it themselves. They were very clever people, and they ended up living there for around 400 years. So, as I say, historic points of interest that I always like to talk about. Obviously, 1198 was when the abbey had finished its construction by David, the Earl of Huntingdon, and brother William the Lion. And then in 1235, a gentleman called Roger de Quincey. He was the Earl of Winchester and also Constable of Scotland. And basically, the monks needed a heating source or a source where they could use cooking, flammable things, and obviously drying their clothes, making fires and things like that. And fairly local to the distillery, about 5 miles south, there's a place called Kinloch. And the Roger de Quincey actually granted the monks use of the peat that came from this loch. The reason I like talking about this reference is because the monks had access to peat all of these years ago. Obviously, we don't know exactly how they were making their concoctions of aqua vitae, but it was probably pretty evidential that they were putting peat through their drying sources. And we don't use any peat through our whiskey at this stage. We would love to, but right now we don't. And the fact that we have a huge connection here with the history of Roger de Quincey and the monks using peat, it's quite a cool place to actually reference in the future, I would have thought. And basically, it became so renowned that the monks were using Kinloch for basically the sourcing of their peat. It got nicknamed the Monks' Moss, and obviously the monks were Christians and Catholics. They dedicated the Monks' Moss, so the Kinloch, to the Virgin Mary, and it then became known as Our Lady's Bog. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. And then over time, Our Lady's Bog, it kind of had a bit of a horrible ring to it, and over time it changed to the name of Lady Bank. And if you look geographically of the map of Fife, there's actually a little place called Ladybank now, and that actually gained its name through the monks, obviously Monks' Moss, through to Our Lady's Bog, to eventually Ladybank. So it's quite a cool and quirky reference that I always like to talk about, and the fact that we have a reference to peat, so we could do peated whiskies in the future. Well, we already do peated whiskies, but we've only matured it in peated casks. We haven't actually peated any of our malt. The reason we haven't is because when I talk a little bit more about the distillery setup, we have traditional wooden washbacks. We don't use stainless steel at all. And if you put peat through wood, it's very hard to get it out. So we knew if we did peated malt through our washbacks or through our system once, it would taint the spirit going forward. And because, as Scott was already highlighting for us, we became very accoladed for our new make spirit very early. We didn't want to break that and start producing a pretty below average new make spirit. So there is room there. Obviously, if expansions happen, we may put stainless steel tanks in to allow us to do it. But right now, it's simply just a talking reference of Roger de Quincey and the monks, and Monks' Moss leading to Ladybank. But a good one that I always like to talk about. Moving forward to 1298, this one always gets the Americans going. there is actually a reference of William Wallace visiting the Abbey. Obviously, it sounds so gimmicky, and everyone just thinks of the movie Braveheart. But there was a Battle of Black Ernside, which happened about 6 miles east of Lindores, where William Wallace and his crew basically fought off the English in the Battle of Ernside. And upon victory in the battle, on the 12th of June, 1298, it is referenced in one of the old books that William Wallace and his knights in shining armor stayed the night at Lindores, and it's actually referenced that they passed through the Slipe. The Slipe is still an area of the abbey that's still basically in good nick. So if you whenever you visit Lindores, if you come right into the middle of the abbey, you'll see this big archway, and it's said that William Wallace passed through that. So Drew tells a fantastic story about him just pondering to himself, just picturing William Wallace passing through this light. But it's very cool that it's still standing, and obviously written down as evidence and reference. However, upon William Wallace's death, 6 months later, Robert the Bruce took reign. There isn't actually reference to Robert the Bruce at Lindores, but his 3 strongest knights were. So basically his right-hand men. They swore an oath at the Abbey to protect Robert the Bruce whilst he was in reign, so much so that they all died in battle for him, but it is recorded that they actually visited the monastery and swore an oath there in 1306 to Robert the Bruce. So two of the biggest Scottish figures who came from Scotland, being William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, they were both referenced at the Abbey. So immediately there was always an immediate link to royalty, and obviously high court of Scotland and its ministers and everything like that. Which, if you do look at our logo, we have our branding logo. We have a crown that sits just above the bear. That's basically acknowledgement to the royalties. As we go into the history, more and more royalties do visit the Abbey itself. So that was basically a nod to why that crown is actually on our crest. And then skipping forward to 1494, I'm hoping you guys know about this already, but this is essentially the reason why Lindores is here as a whiskey distillery and not just a historic little landmark. 1494, in the Exchequer Roll, is recorded 8 bolls of malt to produce aqua vitae for the king. Now, it doesn't really make too much sense when you read that. The Exchequer Roll is essentially the tax record. But in 1494, King James IV at the time commissioned one of the abbot monks of Brother John Cor to produce 8 bowls of malt of aqua vitae for the king. A bowl is an old measurement. I believe 8 bowls equates to about 800 liters, I believe, of what was aqua vitae. Don't quote me on that. I always forget the measurement. But this reference was actually recorded in the tax records, and this was the earliest written reference to, well, aqua vitae, which is the Latin word for whiskey, ever recorded by man. We're not saying we are the earliest producers, but we are the place that holds the earliest written reference. So unless you want to employ a historian to go through even older records to see if they can try and trump us, by all means go for it. But I've seen a picture of the actual Exchequer Roll, and how this historian picked out this wording, I have no idea. But you can see that you can faintly see the wording aqua vitae. But yeah, that's basically the story, or the link, why Lindores is so important with the whiskey world. We hold the first ever written reference to Scotch whiskey itself. So that is the triggering point. Moving onwards, scroll this that side. Just a few more snippets of history, and then we'll move on to the more modern side. 1401. I just like the story of this one, to be honest. The Duke of Rothesay is apparently buried at Lindores, and he died at the tender age of 24 to the hands of his uncle, where he was held captive for between 1400 and 1401, and he was imprisoned with 2 what you call ruffians, very, very bad people, and they basically beat him up until his death, really. But it was said, and it was recorded, that he was suffering of starvation so much that he actually started eating his own fingers off his hand. And because they wanted to cover up the death, that's why they quickly buried him at Lindores. But it was never actually fully referenced as to where exactly he was buried. And I was actually speaking to Drew about this just last week, and he's actually still in the talks with Historic Scotland to see if it's possible to actually identify exactly where he is that it's buried, because it's referenced he's buried by the altar, which is on the back wall of the abbey itself. And obviously you can't just go around digging up the abbey and looking for graves. It needs passing and it needs reasoning. But because Duke of Rothesay again is such a close tie to the historic and royalty links, it'd be quite cool to identify if and where he is buried at the abbey. But it was just a bit of a grim life that he ended with. But the main reason why he'd want to unearth his burial is to see his actual cause of death and see if that's actually doable as well. 1494, again, just referencing to Scotch whisky that we've already spoken about. But then skipping forward just about 50 years later, 49 years later, or 39 years later, my math is terrible. Dark times fell over Lindores, and John Knox, who was a minister of Scotland and very much a Protestant over a Catholic, he and his clan wanted to overrule Scotland and turn it from Catholic to Protestant during the Reformation period. And in 1543, he sent a letter notice to the monks of the abbey saying, look, you guys need to get out of here. And within weeks, him and his clan came through, burned everything that was at the abbey, just completely destroyed it all, and stole anything of value. So it was very, very sad. The sad part of this story is where Lindores is now. The abbey itself is on the other side of the road, and it is just a ruin. It's very sad. It would have been quite the size, but during the 1540s, it was basically crashed and burned. But there is reference to a lot of the Newborough houses on the high street. So Newborough is the little town that runs just along from the abbey. If you actually look closely, you can see a lot of the traditional stonework, which has obviously been stolen from the abbey itself, has built a lot of these houses along the high street. And there's a pub on the high street called the Bear, and what would have been a stone carved out by the monks, it's basically a shape of the bear. That's actually right above the doorway going into the pub, and that's called the Bear. So it's quite a cool little connection really to the stonemason work of Lindores and its monks. So yeah, 1543, the abbey fell. And then in 1584, that was when the local government of the Edinburgh Council decided, right, we need to go and basically clean up the abbey now. And anything left there of value, we will sell to the Council of Edinburgh. And it's said that a lot of artifacts actually were sold to Edinburgh Castle. And then there's a reference here that I've got written down. There was an old abbey clock that would have stood in the bell tower. Obviously, the guys that basically trashed and burned it couldn't take it with their own free will, because it would have weighed quite a lot. But it's referenced here that the Town Council of Edinburgh purchased the abbey clock on the 21st of April, 1585 for £55. So it's quite a cheap clock, really. Well, very expensive. It's not referenced where that went, though, which is quite sad. It'd be quite cool to actually go into Edinburgh, like, oh, that used to be part of the abbey, that used to be part of the abbey. And there was also 4 big church bells that used to stand in the abbey tower. Two were unrecorded, they don't know where they went. But another 2 were again sold to the Edinburgh Council. So they could be in a church in Edinburgh somewhere, we just don't know. So that is the story in my sort of view, to get you a couple of snippet points in there that are quite cool to talk about with your friends and family and things. But then if we skip forward, after the abbey sat basically in ruin for 400 or so years, Granddad John Howison bought the Lindores Abbey farm in 1913. So the picture you see and the top right there, that's the modern, what the distillery building looks like now. But that basically where the glass windows are, that used to be the dairy, where then the cattle shed was out the back. And then just slightly to the right of that, where the rainbow's going off, that's basically the old steading. So the farm was in operation from the late 1800s right through to the 70s, 1970s. But in recent years, it was just kind of housing horses and sheep. It wasn't really doing anything, but it was still standing. And when Drew and Helen decided that they wanted to build a distillery here, they wanted to keep the integrity of the farm alive. They didn't want to dismantle it or flatten it, even though that's the cheapest option. They wanted to keep the integrity of it alive. So that's why you can kind of see the old farm stonework merged with the contemporary new building. And then the picture, the below corner, if you guys can see my cursor here, this gentleman here, that is Drew's grandfather. And then this gentleman here is his great grandfather. So if it wasn't for this chap and all of his money, he purchased the abbey. Sorry, he purchased the house that they moved into, which sits pretty much behind, well, opposite the distillery. The abbey itself is the back garden. He bought the farm, and then I think it came with 3 cottages. He bought that in the year 1913 for a grand total of £3,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure if you scale it up, it's probably quite a lot of money somehow. We don't know how he got his money, but he was quite a wealthy chap for the times. And that abbey and the whole grounds stayed in the family name ever since, which is now 111 years, which is pretty cool. Or 9 years, sorry, 109 years. God, my maths is awful. It's the early morning here. You got to forgive me on my maths. And then Scott did touch on this. This is basically the picture on the right is a reference from Michael Jackson, the famous whiskey author, dated 1st of May 2001. And it says to Ken. Ken was Drew's dad. See page 127. This book was called Scotland and Its Whiskies. Essentially, in the late 90s, Michael Jackson visited the Abbey, wanted to have a look around. At the time, in the 90s, Drew's dad was the one that was living at home. And he politely said to Michael Jackson, yeah, no problem, go have a look around. He didn't know who this guy was at all. And he was out there for a few hours, and Scott will vouch for me here. It doesn't take 3 hours to go around the Abbey unless you're doing something weird. So he was out there for a long time making notes and references to the Abbey. Little did Ken know that he was actually writing a book on Lindores itself. And there's a famous quote within this book for the whiskey lover. It is a pilgrimage. So Ken, the sad part of this story is after Michael Jackson had finished making his notes, he never saw Ken ever again, or Drew ever again. But in 2001, he sent this book through, addressed to Ken, saying see page 227. And on 127 is a whole chapter of Lindores, its history of the monks and its connection to the whiskey world. And obviously Ken at this stage was a very old man. He didn't really think much of it, but then he handed the book over to Drew, and Drew thought, hey, how the heck, we've got to do something with this. And if it wasn't for Michael Jackson visiting at this point, who knows, the distillery might not even be here today. And well, it probably wouldn't be. But this was the triggering moment for Drew. This is when he learned about the reference, and then from reading the book, he set off to make it his lifelong goal to do something with it. Originally, he wanted to bring a visitor centre to Lindores, but as it grew arms and legs, he started speaking to the right people. They were like, well, why don't you just build a distillery? And Drew was like, well, I don't have the money and I don't have the experience. I've never worked or done anything in the whiskey world. So, it was a 20-year project after Drew had learned about the reference, but eventually in 2016, once the planning was forward, we got the private equity coming through. We eventually started construction of the Abbey itself, the distillery itself. And then this is Drew, the founder and my boss, viewing the actual exchequer roll in the Edinburgh archives. As you can see, it's very, very a tender bit of parchment, but it's quite a cool photo, that one, to be quite honest. And then this basically is 2016 when the distillery started its construction. And after I think it was a very quick construction, actually. I think it was about 9 months that it took from start to finish to get everything through. This was the last component really to go in, which was our stills. We have 3 stills at Lindores, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a little while. They're all named after family members of Drew. The bigger one that you see in the middle there, that's our wash still. That's named after Drew's mum, called Dodo. Her real name was Dorothy, but her nickname was Dodo. And then the 2 stills to the left and the right of that one are our spirit stills, and they're named after Drew's daughters, Poppy and Georgina, or Pops and G, as they're referred to now. That's just another angle of it getting craned in. You can see the panel just to the left of the photo, just here. That's where it doesn't look like it'll fit, but that did fit through here. Take my word, it does fit. And it was the last panel to go on for the still house. So if we do ever need to take them out, we can. Well, we will need to take them out at some point, because obviously the stills do deteriorate. So yeah, that was basically the day that Drew and Helen toasted that we're nearly there. And then, yeah, this is basically just another angle of basically, if you're standing in the still house, you get a panoramic view of the Abbey ruin. So that's basically the ruin kind of out here. And then that's the wash still on the right hand side. It's been brilliantly designed, really, really nice to walk around and enjoy the view. And then this was 2017. So Drew on the left, his wife Helen on the right. Some of you may know this chap here, the nose, Richard Patterson, obviously the famous guy from White Mackay. He's a huge advocate of Lindores, and he's a big fan. And then this chap here, another family friend and author, 5-point author Ian Rankin, who again has written some very cool books in his time. That was basically the day we opened, so it's quite a good day to remember. And that is it on the history side. Now, I'm just going to play for you a little video. Sorry, before I do that, I've spoke a lot. I don't like speaking too much. Has anybody got any questions so far? I'll take that as a no. I'm going to play the video now. So the video, basically, I'm going to pause it in areas so you can kind of get an idea of what the distillery looks like and its sort of feel. But the video itself is the launch video for our whiskey. I'll play that, but then we're going to talk through our aqua vitae product and then get dramming, because you guys have been very patient. Hopefully you haven't drank everything that's in front of you already. Right, where are we? No. Sorry, technical difficulties here. There it is. Okay. It's a 4-minute video. So enjoy. Well, before I play, actually, can everybody see that? Just give me a yes, Scott, if you can see that.
Yep.
Cool. So this bit here is Drew and Helen's house. That was built, they believe, in the 1830s. This is the old farm and now distillery that you can see. That's a car park behind. And that's our one and only warehouse, which would have been the cattle shed. This was obviously the dairy farm just here. This little building here is where we probably spend most of our time now. That's the bar. And then this, more importantly, is a bird's eye view of the abbey that's still standing. Well, the ruin that's still standing. And you can kind of see the outer shape here. The slipe that I was talking about William Wallace, that's just under here. And we have loads of big events out here. We put marquees in the abbey there. We have weddings out there and everything like that. You'll see this little hut here. That was my old office pre-COVID. So that was a memory I'll never forget. And then if you go across to this side, you can see a little wall just over there. So there's underneath all of this grassy area here is a lot of old abbey wall. Excuse me, abbey wall. But because it was kind of getting in our way, we thought, well, we won't do anything with it just now, but the best way of preserving something is to keep it buried. So if you kind of follow this tarpaulin going up here and then coming like 90-degree angle down there, there's a whole abbey wall sat right there. And it's quite interesting. Drew's got almost like a blueprint of that was put together by the archaeologists of what's where. So don't build there. And if you want to do something with it, you can do. So yeah, and then this tarpaulin's got a story to it as well. Underneath that is basically what looks to be a well, but it's clearly man-made. But the archaeologists believe it to be somewhere where potentially the monks were making their aqua vitae product, because it almost looks like a basin where a still would actually sit. So the reason we haven't covered that back up is because we want to actually build something around it as a feature and actually make it a part of the tourism point as well. We'll never have the smoking gun for this. It is very much what we believe. It's not 100% evidential, but it's very, very cool. And the reason we believe it not to be a well is because literally about a mile this way off the screen, not even a mile, it's about 300 meters. You've got the Tay estuary, which is fresh water, and you've also got the Holy Burn running down this tree line here. So the monks would have had access to water all the time. So the need to have a well doesn't really leave the question answered. But I'm going to play this video now. Enjoy.
Lindores Abbey in Fife is regarded as a spiritual home of Scotch whisky. The earliest record of distillation is right here in 1494, when a monk named John Cor made aqua vitae, the water of life, for the king. Over 500 years later, in 2017, we opened our doors once again and created a new distillery in the sacred abbey grounds to begin distilling whisky, continuing those age-old traditions of the monks from all those centuries ago. We are proud to host the annual burning of the bear ceremony, celebrating the season's harvest by lighting up the 300-foot bear, which is carved out on the hill above our distillery. Whilst the spirit slept for 3 years and a day, we released our handcrafted botanical spirit, aqua vitae. Made using spices, dried fruits, and locally foraged herbs, such as sweet cicely, which still grows in the abbey ruins today. Then, when we judged it ready, we released our new made spirit, our DNA. And we were justifiably proud when it was voted the best in Scotland in the prestigious World Whisky Awards 2020. But now it's 2021, and our spirit has woken. It is with great pleasure we introduce our Lindores single malt whisky, the first to be distilled on these hallowed grounds for over 500 years.
Lindores Cor Release is our first single malt whiskey. It has a mellow, elegant palate, soft, velvety, smooth texture with complexity and a pleasant finish. It has an interesting, unique profile. A color itself is gold. The nose is elegant, soft, mellow vanilla. Caramel note playing with orchard fruits and sweet berries. It reminds me like toffee apples. And on the palate, it's smooth, creamy texture, and a perfect balance of sweet vanilla, dry fruit, citrus touches, with a hint of spicy woody notes and a pleasant medium lingering finish. First, we do a cask selection, nosing and tasting different samples from all varieties of casks that are candidates for blending. We analyze the profile of each cask. We then prepare formulations with different ratios of cask. The best formula goes through the sensory panel, who are tasting and nosing the sample. After many trials, we have then at the stage where we have a master formula. So this then becomes our Lindores Cor Release.
As a small family-run business and custodians of Lindores, we see it as our role to breathe new life into this historic place, to preserve the Abbey for future generations, and make Lindores Abbey Distillery a beloved destination to visit for generations of whisky pilgrims to come. We invite you to join us on this journey, to enjoy all that this place has to offer, and to savour its taste with the first whisky to be produced on these historic grounds since the 15th century. At Lindores, we've always believed that the past informs the future. And now, after so many years and a great deal of patience and endeavour, we've arrived. and are delighted to introduce you to the Lindores Lowland Single Malt Scotch Whisky, available from July.
So that was a little video basically breaking down our history so far in a very condensed version. As you noticed, we released the aqua vitae first, which is actually the first dram that we're going to try today. Well, tonight for you guys. So without me telling you anything else, if you haven't poured your aqua vitae dram already, please do so. I'm just going to point out there, we don't actually market this to drink it like a whiskey. Obviously, it's your drink, you can drink it how you wish, and it's always good to try it neat anyway. But this was the product that we released as our gin, so to speak. It was the one that we needed to make cash whilst we're in the infancy of the distillery. And it was very much a new brand, a new product, and a new niche. So, sorry, just close that down. There we go. So it was it was very ballsy of Lindores to do this sort of approach, and I still take my hat off to Drew and the team to this day for releasing such a complex product. So what it actually is, it's our new make spirit, which has been drawn off the stills, and then it's gone into a vat where we've then put in locally foraged herbs, fruit, and also spices. Obviously, there wouldn't have been local spices in Scotland. They would have had to trade for these. So the way they would have had access to spices to put into their aqua vitae itself, they would have traded through the Tay estuary, trading salmon and fleece. So to break it down, it's what we believe the monks were once making all those years ago in the contemporary modern form today. So that's the bottle I'm kind of holding up there, in case you haven't seen it before. So we use brown glass, white label with this product. And you'll notice the logo is quite different here. We use a different logo for our aqua vitae product, or our botanical spirit produce, in contrast to our whiskey. So we use brown glass because we wanted it to be perceived to be a very old product, because it is. And then the actual bottle shape itself, you'll notice it's got almost like a serrated edge here, going all the way around. And it's got a, what is that? 1, 2, 3. Not a hexagonal, but it's got a unique shape at the bottom as well. And there's an actual story around the bottle design, which we've carried forward through to the whiskey as well. When we were doing the build, a lot of the excavation work that was going on at the Abbey, we unearthed a lot of old stone, which is actually on display in the distillery today. And it's basically looks like the glass, and it's what we believe to be, well, the archaeologists believe to be the old columns that would have stood in the Abbey itself. So we thought it's such a unique shape and style of stone, we had to do something with it, and why not design your bottle shape around it? So again, everything we tried to do, we try and tie to the history links as best we can. Nothing's a gimmick. And yeah, that's why we've got quite an iconic bottle shape now, which ties to our history even further. So to break it down with the aqua vitae and its flavor, obviously there's a lot going on. The thing that always stands out for me is we use Douglas fir pine needles, and it's very sweet and it's very herbal. The spicy note kind of comes through at the back. And when we first launched this, we did actually market it as a whiskey, and it was confusing a lot of locals. So we thought, well, they obviously are coming to these stands at the shows, they're trying it, and they're all getting, confused. It's like, this isn't a whiskey. So we had to change our marketing plan with it, and we decided, well, let's design it similar to a gin, but do a perfect serve. So if anybody has any ginger ale to hand, I would definitely highly recommend a bit of ice, bit of ginger ale, and a slice of orange. That's exactly what we use as the perfect serve for our aqua vitae. And it's one of those products that if it's the winter, it's a winter warmer, and if it's a summer, it's super duper refreshing, and it breaks it away from the whiskey. So it's a complex product. It's in its own niche. It takes a lot of basically educating for people to get their head around it. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed that first one. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know, and any feedback as well, also let me know.
I think Elliot, one of the things that I always enjoy talking with people about when they're trying this is to remember that, you know, in 1494, when King James was ordering whiskey or aqua vitae, he wasn't getting whiskey that we know today. He was drinking something like the aqua vitae we're just trying now. And I think, you know, it's a wonderful opportunity to have a bit of a glimpse back into history of, well, what was whiskey, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. You know, this idea that whiskey is the thing that we drink today, this, you know, that's aged in wood, and, you know, the selecting special casks and all that sort of thing, when in actual fact it was closer to, you know, it was more akin to the types of drinks that we, you know, I mean, if you want to talk about a mass brand, oh God, I'm having a mental blank. What's the mass brand that everybody has a shot of?
Tequila.
Oh God, I've dropped myself in it now, haven't I?
Fireball.
At least it's not me.
Fireball.
No, like if you're at the Snow and you're having a shot of something, yeah, like Benedictines and all these sorts of things. They're more the drinks that were more about medicinal purposes than they were just straight drinking. Excuse me. Speaking of drinking.
And just to point out, I didn't mention the aqua vitae is unaged, quite as Scott pointed out there. Cask maturation isn't referenced till the 17th century. Scott's dying. Bless him. So that's why we haven't aged this drink. It is very much an unoaked. It's basically just new make spirit, which has then been macerated for 7 days with different herbs, spices, and fruits. It's then been diluted down to 40%, and then we've chill filtered it. The reason we chill filtered it is because when you use raw botanicals like this, there's a lot of floaters within the product. So we have to chill filter it, otherwise you'll have weird and wonderful things floating in your drink right now. So we didn't want that. Yeah, hopefully you understand the kind of concept of where we're coming from. We're just trying to recreate the contemporary feel of the history of the aqua vitae, what we believe the monks were once making, and now we're recreating it into the present day. And it was very much our starting point at Lindores as well. So we're very proud of the product. You know, no one else did it. It's almost like, you know, when you have a nation's spirit drink like eau de vie in France or aquavit in the Scandinavian markets, this is Scotland's version.
Do you know, Elliot, do you know if back then when they were making it was, do you think that they filtered it and drank it so clean, or do you think it was actually just still full of the herbs and bits and pieces, and they just,
I think it was probably filled with everything really, and it's actually referenced, as Scott has already pointed out, the medicinal side. I think when they first made alcohol, they were thinking, oh, this helps with cures, and then obviously they like the kind of sense it gave, and then they thought, hey, let's try and adapt this and throw different things in there, and that's where it started becoming an actual palatable drink. And that's why they started foraging around for local herbs, spices, and fruits. But I think the whole filtering things, it's got to be too far for them. I think the more bits and floaters they have in there, they'll probably love. But that market's changed. I think if we marketed it like that, it'd be quite entertaining. Saying that, we could look at Pimm's. We could have the aqua vitae Pimm's version if you wanted to, with all the fruit and everything floating in it.
Yeah, definitely. It's good.
Did anyone else have any questions on product number one? No. Cool. Now, just give me 2 seconds, guys. I'm just trying to find some pictures for you to share with the distillery.
So prior to the distillery being there, was there much reference to whiskey or aqua vitae in that town? Like, was there a museum? Was there anything there at all?
Nothing at all, quite sadly. You know, no, there's obviously reference to the Abbey, in the town, but nothing to do with the actual whiskey. When Drew learnt about the reference, he obviously then went digging for historic books and things like that, and apparently there was an old library. It's no longer open now. That was actually on the Newborough High Street that Drew basically got a lot of his references from. So there were areas, but there was never anything to say, oh, this is the birthplace of whiskey. Obviously, the cutout, you'll notice in the bear in the video, the bear on the hill. I never touched on that, but the story of our brand and our crest, the bear and the crooked staff. The Earl of Warwick was the uncle to one of the abbot monks who lived and worked at the abbey. And when he visited the abbey, he granted the use of the Warwickshire crest to the Lindores monks, and that then became the crest of Lindores. So that's the history and the story behind where our brand logo comes from. Obviously, we can't use the bear and the crooked staff as our logo because it's copyright. So we basically manipulated it to coincide with Lindores. So I'll hold up a whiskey bottle now. You can see that it's the letter L, and then with the bear kind of leaning on the L, and it's obviously mirror imaged as well, again for copyright. So that's basically where our logo comes from. But going back to the cutout of the bear on the hill, which we now light annually for the celebration of the harvest, excuse me, that's been on the hill for well over 30 years. Yeah, no problem, Howard. I will speed up for you, sir. Apologies. That's been on the hill for 30 years, and it is actually like a little ceremony, or like a little festival that all the locals used to. We've done it for years. They used to light it every year, and now we've just kind of adopted it to a distillery event, which is pretty cool. But yes, I am blabbing on. Apologies, Howard. I'll move on to our next product, and that is our core release whiskey. As you saw, Lorena, the Chilean lady in the video.
The new make.
What's that?
New make.
Oh, sorry, new make. Apologies. It's because I haven't got the new make in front of me.
Yeah.
The next dram that I need you guys to pour is the transparent liquid. That's our new make spirit. So we have a very unique setup in the distillery. Sorry, I'll get that to in a sec. So our new make spirit, Scott touched on it right at the start, where we won an award for it. Back in 2020, we became the best new make spirit producer in Scotland, which was very, very highly accoladed to say that we didn't have any whiskey on the market. Everything was going in the right direction. So our distillery setup, we source all of our barley from 2 very local farmers. All of their farms are within a 3-mile radius of the distillery. And one of the farmers who supplies about 40% of our barley is Drew's cousin, Roger. So it's really nice to keep it as close as into the family as we possibly can. And then the other farmer who literally lives on just the other side of Lindores, the Bray of Lindores, called Richard Black. Between the 2 of them, they supply all of our barley. So it's really quite nice to have everything coming so close to home. We don't do the maltings on site. That gets done at Alloa, and then it comes back to us, and we do our own milling on site. And then from the milling up to the mash, we have a 2-ton semi-lauter mash tun. And it's about 7.5 hour, 8-hour mash. But the more unique side of our mashing is we produce a clear wort. You may or may not have heard of contrasts of clear and cloudy worts. We aim for a clear wort, because when you bring the solids over using a cloudy wort, you typically get a nuttier style of spirit. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not what we wanted to produce. We wanted to produce that classic lowland nice, light and sweet. So that's why we produce a clear wort there. And then moving on to the fermentation, we have very long fermentations for the industry. Our shortest currently is 72, but our longest, which is the majority of the fermentations we have per week, is 114 hours. How we landed on 114, basically when we first started production, we have 4 washbacks, 2 were at 72 and 2 were at 96. And we noticed straight away off the first distillation that the 96-hour fermentations were far superior to the 72 hours. So Gary, our distillery manager, started looking at our production process. Obviously, we just do one mash a day. We don't do double shifts or anything like that. We're very small in output. And he started playing around with the fermentation times and lining it up so we could have the longer fermentations, still get the 4 mashes within the week, but not mess around with people's shift patterns. So they still came in at 8 o'clock in the morning, went home at around 5 o'clock. And that's how we landed on the 114 hours. So in 2019, part of 2020, we were doing 4 mashes, 1 at 96 and 3 at 114. And then coming into 2021, into 2022, we wanted to start upping our production slightly. So that's where we introduced 2 shorter fermentations at 72, and then another 3 at 114 hours. All of the fermentations are obviously blended together at the end for the week's production. And we noticed there was very minimal change in the spirit, despite upping the production slightly for us as well. So we were very, very happy with the spirit quality. So we've stuck with that going forward. We can't really up our production anymore now, unless we install another mash tun or more washbacks. So that's just more capital that we need in the business to be able to do that. So we're very, very small in terms of output. The output figure is 155,000 litres of pure alcohol, which translates to roughly about 265, 270 in bulk liquid a year. A lot of the bigger distilleries can produce that in probably a week or a month or so. So we're very, very small, but we're very much quality over quantity, and we very selective of who we work with as well. Obviously, Scott's doing a fantastic job coming into Australia as well. So finally, on the still side, we touched on the stills briefly when I was talking through the slides, but we have a very unique, well, it's not unique. There's another distillery that has the same setup, sadly. We have 3 stills here at Lindores, 1 wash still, 2 spirit stills. We run the spirit stills simultaneously. We don't run them separate. We don't triple distill. The ethos or the concept behind having 2 spirit stills was having smaller, quicker distillations, but high copper contact. So then you're extracting a lot of those fruitier esters from the copper. You aren't bringing through the higher volatiles of the sulfur and the cheesy notes. And because we have that high copper contact and the shorter distillations, our new make spirit is unbelievably fruity, which hopefully you guys are understanding now. In case you were wondering, the other distillery that has the same setup is Annandale, who is another lowland distillery, who were very fortunate to have the exact same designer as what we did, and that being Jim Swan, or the late Jim Swan, who sadly passed away now. But that's why we have 3 stills as opposed to 2. If we had 1 bigger still as a spirit still, the spirit would be completely different, and we may not have won the best new make in Scotland. So very, very happy with our setup. That's a broad overview of our distillery setup in terms of how we run it. And we also run our stills very, very slowly, bring the heat on nice and slow. We noticed if we charge them high and fast, it changes the character completely. We start getting more like lemony flavors and pear drops, which to me, it tastes a little bit synthetic. It's not, obviously people love pear drops as a sweet, but personally we don't like it in our new make. And
I think, Elliot, the new make, while we're moving on to the next single malt, into the actual core products, but that new make is just delicious on its own. It's really fruity, creamy. That's that malty backbone is for a young product. The new make's not even whiskey, it's just the new make that's coming straight off the still. I think it's 63.5%. I mean, it certainly doesn't drink like that at all. And I think, it's a wonderful sort of look into the DNA of the core product that we're about to try now.
Yeah, and just lastly on the new make, and you will probably hopefully see it coming through in our whiskey, is going back to the fermentations. We use traditional wood. Before I started working in a distillery, I didn't give two hoots about whether it was stainless steel or whether it was wooden. For me, having a wooden washback is far superior to having a stainless steel, because especially with us having longer fermentations, there's a lot of natural bacteria within the wood that helps the fermentation along, especially in the later stages. And it's what we believe gives you that complexity in the mouthfeel of an older whiskey. It's got that oily component, which you don't typically get from young whiskies anyway. It's something that typically takes time. But you might get it from the new make with the oily coating, but you'll definitely get it through the whiskies as we move on to them. I can talk about our fermentation vessels for a long time. They're brilliant vessels. Okay, so everybody happy with the new make?
Great stuff.
Brilliant. I suppose it's just natural to move on to our first ever release and our core product, which is available in Australia and has been for quite some time now, thanks to Scott. And that's what we like to call, you'll notice as well, we've gone transparent glass as opposed to brown glass with the aqua vitae for our core product. So that's it just there. Oops, where are we? Sorry, the lighting's awful in here. So it's called the MCD XCIV, quite a mouthful, but it translates to 1494 to coincide with the first ever written reference. This is on average about 3 1/3, 3.5 years old. So it's very, very young for a whiskey, but it surprises so many people. It's diluted down to 46%. It's all natural colour, and we don't chill filter. The core product comprises of 3 different cask types. The higher ratio compound going into this is all ex-bourbon. We then use the ex-red wine STR, and then we also top it up with a little bit of Oloroso sherry. It's broken down in that ratio. Obviously, I can't share with you the exact percentages, otherwise I'll get shot. And yeah, so this is our core product. A little bit of the provenance on the casks. The bourbons that we use are either ex-Old Forester or ex-Woodford Reserve. They're shipped whole to us. You may have heard that in the industry, a lot of Kentucky bourbon barrels are actually flat packed and then rebuilt in Scotland and then sent to the distilleries. We don't do that. They come shipped in whole form, and we take, I think it's about 200 barrel loads, 200 barrels in a load at a time. But yeah, that's the core bourbon that we've used within our portfolio. And then Howard, yes, we do plan to do cask strength. We've done many market releases, especially in the UK, some abroad as well, which have been at cask strength. And I may have touched on it with you, Scott, already, but our next release that will be in the core range will be cask strength, but I can't share anything too much more on that just yet. But yeah, our cask strength is just as good as its dilution. It's fantastic. It all works brilliantly well together. So yeah, that's our core product. The red wine STR was a cask that was developed between a gentleman called Miguel Martin in Spain and Jim Swan himself. It was a cask that was developed to almost accelerate the maturation speed, but not doing it artificially. So what it is, it's a red wine cask, either Portuguese or Spanish, we don't know. We don't get told that, unfortunately. It then does a barrel maturation of about 18 months or so. It then gets shaved by about 1 millimeter on the inside to expose some of the virgin wood that the wine hasn't seeped into. You then basically break the cask down in almost like the traditional sherry pyramid shape, and then you toast it over oak chips just for a little while. So it's not a heavy char at this stage; it's a light toasting, and that helps caramelize the new wood to become caramelized, so it doesn't become overly spicy. And then once the cask's rested, you then rebuild it, and then you heavily char it to re-caramelize the existing wood sugars left over from the wine. That cask type itself, in a single cask form, but in a blending form, is fantastic. And I do strongly believe if that cask didn't exist, I don't think we'd be able to release a core product as good as it is just now. And then the last and final cask type that goes into our product is Oloroso Sherry, which again comes from Miguel Martin in Spain. They're seasoned casks for around 4 years. So they aren't traditional Solera casks that we use with this, because that'll just be so expensive. And you obviously need that more active, wet sherry cask to be able to have that fantastic maturation come through as well. So yeah, that's our 3 cask blend that makes up our 1494.
Oh, yeah.
And just to reiterate, we will be doing cask strength versions as well going forward. Any thoughts, any questions, let me know.
I just you know, from the first time I tasted this core product, Elliot, I think it just immediately, to be perfectly honest, the person who really drove it home for me was my wife. And like all sensible men, I tend to listen to her when she's speaking clearly with a whiskey in her hand. But she just really brought it home to me about the elegance of this whiskey. It's all too easy sometimes to just go barreling into whiskey and not wanting to think too much about it and not paying enough attention to the whiskey at hand. But she really just made me stop and think about it a bit more because it captured her imagination, and the elegance of it, even though it's youthful, the structure of it, the components have all integrated so well. And I think for a first cab off the rank, it really has just been absolutely magnificent, which has been borne out, I think, time and time again. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think, it's what consumers think. And we just constantly see across events, whiskey tastings, just people are voting with their hands at the end of the day, or with their lips and palates. And just for a 3.5-year-old whiskey, it belies its age. It's just got the lovely creaminess about it, and oiliness, and those lovely orchard fruits. And I think that the wine, the STR wine cask, really brings a maturity sort of in the background there that you might not find if it was just a straight bourbon or something like that. But yeah,
definitely, especially if you're using just bourbon. Obviously we've done that as what is the next one actually. You'll probably notice that if you had just bourbon as a core release, it probably wouldn't be doing as well as the core product, because it's just got more complexity in it, to be quite honest. Well, obviously this is our driving force. This is our main bottling, which is again readily available to everybody on the tasting tonight. So if anybody has any questions about it, or how we came to the consensus of doing this bottle, just let me know. Now's the time. I'll obviously leave my details with Craig, and well, Scott has them already. If anyone wants to ping me an email about any additional questions that you might have, I'll gladly answer them. I'm just trying to make sure I'm covering all bases, to be quite honest.
Where are you mainly getting the barrels from? Where are you sourcing your barrels from?
So the bourbon comes directly from Kentucky Bourbon Barrels. Gentleman called Tim Ratliff we deal with there. Again, the brands of the bourbon are Old Forester or Woodford Reserve. They come from the Brown Forman umbrella. And then the sherries and red wines come directly from Miguel Martin in Spain.
Right. Good. From seasoned barrels or from long term?
Correct, yeah. So the sherries are seasoned for 4 years, I believe. All Oloroso. We have filled all different types of sherries. We've got a huge portfolio of different cask types. As Scott quite rightly knows, we're obviously trying to do something quite cool for Australia at some point. We do have the casks there to obviously do these weird and wonderful things, but the 3 core types that we're covering today are just bourbon, sherry, and red wine.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm eager to get on to the next one, because I want to really understand the difference between this one and the next whiskey.
Sure, no problem. So just to quickly break down, the next three are a series. And when we were doing the marketing plan and the strategy of how we were going to have a core range, because we always knew we were going to have a young core range quite quickly, and so much so that we've got all four of them in front of you today, which is fantastic. So the way we wanted to do this core range was to deconstruct our core release whiskey, which is the MCDXCIV, into a vatting of bourbon, a vatting of red wine, and a vatting of just sherry, in simple terms. So you can see for yourselves what our individual cask types are doing, that then obviously come together in the right ratio, builds up our core product. So the first one that we'll come to naturally is the ex-bourbon Cask of Lindores series. So this is a vatting of around 50 to 60 bourbon barrels. We've diluted it down to 49.4. I'll tell you why in a second. Again, all natural colour, and non-chill filtered once more. And you'll notice on the bourbon cask, it has a slight beige colour to the sub-label. This isn't the exact bottle. This is an exclusive cask that I picked up, hence the writing on the label. So just ignore this one. But the beige is the one you want to be looking out for if you're after the bourbon one. And then going back to the strength, when we were playing around with it, because we knew we didn't want to do everything at 46. That's the whole point of having a core product. So we knew we wanted to make this one slightly higher. And when we were going through the sensory analysis as a team, we diluted to different strengths. I think we did 54, 52, 50, and 48. And it was quite surprising. Well, it wasn't surprising. It was quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Evidential that the whole consensus of the team, we all decided that the 50% strength worked the best with this release. And then someone in the team, I can't remember who it was, they were like, oh, why don't we dilute it down another 0.6% to 49.4? And then it will coincide with the year of the reference, 49.4. And I was like, well, it wasn't my decision at the end of the day. Drew said, you know what, absolutely, because that's why we're here. So that's why we landed on the strength for all of the releases at 49.4%. So yeah, a vatting of different Old Forester and Woodford Reserve bourbon barrels makes up the Cask of Lindores bourbon. That is everything I need to say on that one.
This has been, interestingly, this has been super popular with a lot of small seasoned whiskey drinkers, if you like. Which I mean, I can understand why. I think, you can't hide behind a bourbon cask, and this just tells the true nature of, going back to the new make spirit. It's faultless. It's a faultless new make spirit, and I think most people who are seasoned whiskey drinkers will know that a really good spirit in really good bourbon casks produces just an exceptional whiskey experience, and I think this is a great example of that. Lifted ABV just gives it a bit more punch, but that new make spirit is just really shines alongside the bourbon casks, and just work wonderfully together. And I think that's why it's just hit that real popular note with people in that respect. Just goes to show, I think, with in terms of, well, what's the whiskey going to be like in the future, and you can just see that, well, this has got wonderful years ahead of it. I can't wait tasting 10-year-old bourbon cask Lindores, or even 15, 20-year-old Lindores out of a bourbon cask. I think it's going to show all those really just delicious orchard fruit notes and complexity that we can know and love.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's definitely a really good transition there between the new make now and that bourbon. Like, you really can see it come through. But it's very different to the last whiskey, I think. What was it? But yeah, it's nice. It's
This is
very easy drinking.
this is our backbone to the core blend. Obviously, bourbon is the highest volume of casks that we fill at Lindores.
Yeah.
So if our bourbon's good, everything else should follow. That's the kind of ethos that we have with it. And also, just to touch on the series that we're going through, the Cask of Lindores series, you'll notice that each of the labels says limited edition. It's working very much in, like, for example, the Kilhoman Lochgorn. You know, they release it annually, and it's always limited and always changes year on year. We're doing the same with all 3 releases. They're all going to be limited each time we release them, and we're doing it in 6-month increments. So, for example, if we release the Cask of Lindores bourbon in the new year, you won't see that same release again until the middle of 2024. So it'll be 18 months for every cycle. So every 6 months we have the next release. And we've sorry, Karen, Craig.
Oh, no, sorry, but what are you chasing for then? What's your aim? 10 years, 8 years? Is there
to release an age statement?
Yeah.
I believe year 8 is on the cards.
Yeah.
But I think just as the world turns with the whiskey world now, we're not in any rush to release an age statement, to be honest. And we're also just going to manage the stocks. Obviously, we've still got another 5 years or so to kind of build the brand. So we'll see what the consumers are after, you know, and where our stocks are sitting in terms of quality. Because we know very much that our core casks are doing well at a young age, but, you know, they might plateau sooner than we think, you know. So we need to keep an eye on that sort of concept of where our casks are going. But from what I've heard from the top down, it sounds like year 8 that we're looking for.
Yeah, because I was like Bill Lumsden recently was saying, that's the thing about whiskey now, or just like generally the spirit, any spirit that you make now, there's more science involved now. We understand it better than we did 20, 30 years ago. So to produce it, you know, you produce something so good so early, it's much easier to do that. So age now is like, you know, what does the age matter? You know, it's about how good is a distillery to produce something really quickly and keep doing that, because then you're more likely to get it quicker, and, you know, they're not likely to run out. So it's it's amazing that the science has came that far now that everybody really understands it. So
definitely couldn't agree more. Could not agree more. So I noticed Howard's obviously all gone through all 3. You can quite happily go through all 3 of the Cask of Lindores series now, because there's not too much more that I can really tell you about, because obviously all the strengths are the same. It's just a cask type that's simply changing. I suppose one thing to touch on is the cask size for all 3 releases. Is the bourbon's the smallest. We just use barrels with our bourbons, which are typically 200 litres in size. The red wines, they go slightly bigger to a barrique, so they're between 225 and 230 litres. And then our last one, the Oloroso Sherry, has come directly from butts. And you'll all probably most likely know, the larger the cask, the slower the maturation. So if you are finding the sherry, for example, a little bit more immature compared to the other 2, it's probably the size of the cask that's probably doing that. But personally, I agree with Howard, not to shoot down the other 2 releases. I've just got a very complex palate, but the bourbon for me is the absolute winner. After the core release, it shows our integrity of the distillery. It shows our backbone. We're not hiding anything in the bourbon, and if that's good, then I'm a happy boy. But I suppose a question that I always ask people that are consuming our drams is, now that you're going through the whole range, including the new make, can you pick out essences of our new make in every release? Because that's how you determine if a brand's doing well. Yes, you can have these silly single casks as just like a sherry bomb that overpower the new make spirit, but to show our consistency, I always like to have, you should be able to pick up a similar, if not the same tasting note within each release. That obviously goes back to our new make spirit. For me, there's always that citrus sort of fruity note that comes through. I'm just going to read some of these notes actually, because I've missed them all. So, yeah. Has anyone else got any questions or feedback? Feedback's very important for us. We're still at that age where feedback's the best form of criticism, constructive criticism we can have.
Just more. I mean, I find that the STR smells a little bit more fermented. Like it smells like that.
Okay.
More beery. Would you say that or?
No, it's interesting you say that. Do you pick up a sour note with it?
A little bit, yeah. It's like a sour
Yeah,
beer.
honestly, we get it quite a lot. It's almost like plummy sour plums that we tend to pick up with this one. And it's really, really quite interesting because I find when this comes to temperature, you see when we were sampling it from the warehouse and it was colder, we were like, oh, geez, that's so spicy. It's like a rye whiskey. And then obviously we dialed it down, brought it to temperature, and the flavor changed completely. And on a cask strength version of the STR, I find the spice really comes forward. But on a diluted version, you get this sort of like you say, this, it's not very nice tasting there, but you do get this sort of like fermented vibe. And we've had very, very many saying that it's sour, almost tasting and smelling, and they sound like spiced plum. Nothing wrong with it, but some people love it, some people not so much. But I quite like the contrast between cask strength and the diluted version as well.
I think it's really interesting to see the three components separately relative to the core product, because it just gives you that understanding that sometimes you know, the sum of the parts is greater than the parts on their own, and you can just see how wonderfully integrated that core product is with the three components: the bourbon, the wine cask, and the sherry. On their you know, I mean, because on their own, I think, you know, the bourbon cask sings away nicely with youth, but perhaps on their own, the wine and the sherry cask, you know, will show a lot more character with a bit more age on them. But bring them together now at the same time in the right percentages. Yeah, just it's a testament to the team who have sort of, you know, brought this together, because yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to understand what that core product is without looking at these individual components. So yeah, I love that.
I sometimes feel though that in any distillery, sherry tends to hide the spirit. And I think that with Lindores, you don't want to do that. Like, you're not wanting to do it at this stage. And that sherry last one's starting to hide the spirit, and you're like, oh, so that means it needs more time to show its sherry character. Then it will completely hide that spirit. Whereas the other two, they don't do that, and they don't even look like they're pushing towards that. They just look like they're pushing to just enhancing the spirit as they go, you know. And I like that. Yeah.
We this actually answers. Jason's put a question in the chat there about how do we choose the blend between the three? Does it change each year? No, the blends stayed the same. And the way we chose the blend, it was sheer just out of flavor profiling to the different ratios, and it kind of answers what Craig's saying as well. We always knew the bourbon was going to be the backbone. That's the highest ratio that we use. The difficult part that we were trying to kind of pinpoint down was the blend between the STR and the sherry. We use very, very little sherry within our core blend, because we found if we just use that little bit too much, it overpowers it. It's as stupid as it sounds. And because the dynamic and the ethos of Lindores has been really good with bringing everybody together, because we've all had our own input into it. It's not been going up to a corporate lab and we don't see it, and then they just come back and say, oh, this is what we're doing. We do all of the work internally, but for the core release, we did consult with can't remember her name now, but she worked in the Diageo blending labs for a lot of years. She was a connection of Gary, our distillery manager, and she came in just to help guide us as to how to kind of manipulate it to where we wanted it to be. And then once we landed on the recipe, obviously the major compounds, bourbon, the middle compounds, red wine, the lower compounds, sherry, we're deciding we're just going to stick with that recipe. We're just basically doing it batch by batch. We don't change anything. However, as naturally with every single distillery, over time it probably will change, but we're looking to keep it at the same age each time as well. We're going to keep it at that 3.5, 3 1/3 sort of age bracket. We're not going to get older and older each year. It is going to stay the same and let our older stocks build up, and then we may change it as well. Does that mean that each barley? So I'm just reading Jason's other question that he's got. So does that mean that each barley harvest year has little effect on the new mixed spirit? If so, is that because of the malting process? I would expect there to be some annual variance. Yes, absolutely. The wine in the barrel, Howard, is either Spanish or Portuguese red wine. We don't get told the provenance, unfortunately. Jason, yes, we have variants with our barley each harvest. We struggle a lot through the hotter months at the distillery, where obviously it's like making bread. You need to keep the temperature down when you're taking over the fermentation. We've had trouble in the past where the temperature in the distillery is so high. We try and bring it down, but the cooling water's too warm, basically. So we've had trouble with the yields in fermentation, obviously converting to alcohol, but bringing it back a process to the barley and the malt. Back in 2018, 2019, we used Fife barley. We didn't have the 2 local farmers producing at the time because they weren't scaled up to it yet. And when we transitioned from Fife barley to our local barley, I remember walking into the still house the day we changed, and the whole smell had completely changed. That maltiness had changed. I can't quite pinpoint where it had changed and why. I didn't know if it was better or worse. But yes, there's variances with yields all the time with each harvest. But I believe that with us having such a unique process with the clear wort and the long fermentations with traditional wood, the differences are very minute. You'd really need to have a real nerd to go in there with a nose to be able to pick out the differences between a 2020 cask and a 2018 cask. Obviously, we're still in that process though, because we haven't released any whiskey yet that has our local barley. It's all Fife grown barley at the minute that's getting released. So hopefully that answers your question. There will be variances, but it's going to be interesting to see where our whiskey goes when we do move on to the local barley. I hope if anything, it'll be better.
Will it be called Lindores local barley?
It's a good question, Scott. I definitely feel that we should highlight it, but there might be a crossover, where we do mix each barrel type with each.
Yeah.
Say if we mix 2019 and 2020, for example, which we will definitely need to do because we've got a hole in our production in 2020. Because of COVID, we had to shut down for 4 months. So we're going to have to recoup that year's stock from somewhere. But there will come a time where we don't use any old stock. So maybe we change something on the label there. I'm not too sure. It's something it's definitely needs discussing internally. But again, it's a good marketing point of view as well. But yeah, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful experience that we do all the time. And it's a case of how to better our yield, how to better our spirit that Gary's always ongoing with. I'm just not allowed to say them yet. It's annoying, but keeps you guys on your toes, I suppose. I appreciate everybody asking their questions. I'm just trying to double check I haven't missed any.
That's right. We also have a look. Just let everybody know that if you are interested in the STR and the sherry, they will be emailed to you. The details emailed, and if you are after a bottle, the pricing will be emailed tomorrow as well. And if you're after a bottle, just email us back, and you'll be able to pre-order a bottle due in the country sometime in late December, I think. What was it?
Oh well, hopefully early December.
I'm saying late
these days.
Just to cover
your order's been uplifted now, hasn't it, Scott?
Yeah, it's yes.
It's on the move.
Yep. So look, we hope to see it early December. But you know, until it's here, it's not here.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I just want to say thank you for sending the bottle of the STR and the sherry over, because no one's seen that. I hadn't even seen it before. Yeah, so everybody's had a bit of a privileged preview of that, and yeah, first people in the country to have a look at those two. So thank you for that, Elliot. That was wonderful.
No problem. I'll show you a picture if everybody wants to know what they all look like. There's a good picture somewhere here.
That sherry really opens up with a bit of water, everybody, if you've not done that. So a couple of drops of water.
So they're the bottles there, if everybody can see that. Obviously, it's a wonderful contrast in colours. You can kind of differentiate between them all. But the way to identify it, obviously it says on the label, but your beige is the bourbon, the pink's the red wine, and then your purple is the sherry as well. So yeah, that's our product brochure there. That's just product codes for. These are the different sizes that we do our aqua vitae and whiskey in. We don't do smaller sizes with our Cask Lindores series. It's just 70 cls we do there. That's just a close-up of the STR one as well. So yeah, hopefully you like the designs. They should hopefully be iconic enough to stand out on the shelf. But yeah, if you want to get a bottle, you know who to talk to. And it's not me.
You're just making it.
Exactly. I just talk about it now.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Elliot. Wonderful.
No problem at all.
Love to know all about it. I guess that's what Lindores is about, understanding the past and then what you've recreated. And it'll be a good one to watch throughout the next few years as well as that progresses. And like you said, there's more matured whiskey there. And then obviously you get to a point where you think, well, this is ideal. This is exactly what we wanted to produce at the start. But thanks, Scott, as well, for arranging the tasting and obviously supplying stock to us to taste the stuff that's not even in Australia yet, getting it over here. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. Again, we have 2 tastings coming up at the end of the month. Tomorrow we'll have the Bimber tasting available. So tasting Bimber English distillery. I mean, you just can't get enough of that at the moment either. And Scott will be back with us at the end of the month. And we've also got Iniquity from the Tin Shed Distillery over in South Australia. He'll be releasing 5 whiskies that night, all brand new whiskies for us to taste and try and purchase if we're interested. And yeah, again, thanks everybody. Is the bourbon coming in?
The bourbon is here
on the website already. The bourbon cask matured is on the website. Whiskey company. I'll put the link in there somewhere. And the code's Lindores10 for 10% off anything on the website at the moment. And it will carry that on to the sherry and the STR wine as well. When we price that for you, we'll let you know there'll be 10% off that as well. It's just not here yet to put it on the website for you to purchase. As soon as it is, you'll be able to do that and get pre-orders in. But yeah, thanks to everybody. And again, thanks to Elliot. Wonderful. You'll be able to go now and have some breakfast.
Start my day's work. Damn it. Yeah, that's fun. Just I don't know if it's Craig or Scott that's hosting the Zoom, but Drew has asked me to share my tastings internally for training purposes as well. So if you can send me the recording, that'll be great.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be on our YouTube channel as recorded, and it will also. But I'll send you the link to it as well through, so you can have a look back at it. It's always good to have a look back and listen to your own voice.
Oh, I hate it. You know,
I've just done about 25 videos of lots of different tastings, and I've had to listen to them back, and it's horrible.
Yeah, you just kill your toes, don't you? Super cringe.
It's not good at all. Not good at all. You always think you can do better, but you did a great job. Thank you very much. And thanks.
I honestly thank you so much, Scott and Craig, for obviously linking in and organising it. You know, anytime, you know, I don't mind. You know, it's actually quite nice to do this in the morning because usually you're waiting around for these things, but it's nice to get up and start my day off right.
That's right. Yeah, good stuff.
Cheers.
This is filled with whiskey, by the way.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
All right,
Yeah,
cheers.
take care, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.